A white newspaper in Harlem printed 2 words that would cost them everything: street rat. The man they named didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. Within 30 days, the presses went silent, the editors scattered, and the building stood empty because Bumpy Johnson understood that respect isn't negotiated, it's enforced. The paper hit the stoops at dawn like it always did, rolled tight, bound with string, tossed from the back of a rattling Ford that smelled like ink and diesel. By 7 a.m., it was everywhere. Barbershops, diners, corner stores, kitchen tables across Harlem. People unfolded it with their coffee, scanned the headlines, turned the pages without much thought. Bumpy Johnson taught his copy at a cafe on Lenox Avenue. He didn't buy it. Someone handed it to him, face tight, eyes careful. That alone told him something was wrong. He sat at his usual table near the window. Morning light slanted across the wood. He unfolded the paper slowly, the way a man does when he's already decided how the day will end. Page 3. Middle column. Small headline, but the words were big enough. Street rat Bumpy Johnson holds Harlem hostage. He read it twice. No change in expression. No twitch, no flinch, no breath held too long. Just his eyes moving across the ink, slowly, methodically, the way a man reads a contract he's about to void. The article called him a thug, a parasite, a criminal feeding off his own people. It mocked his reputation, questioned his intelligence, reduced 30 years of survival and respect to 2 words: street rat. Bumpy folded the paper, set it down, picked up his coffee, took a sip. Across the table, his associate waited, watched, finally asked, voice low, "What you want done?" Bumpy didn't look up. Nothing yet. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, heavy, the kind that makes men shift in their seats. Because anyone who knew Bumpy Johnson understood. His stillness wasn't peace. It was preparation. Harlem in 1937 wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a nation within a nation, boxed in, looked down on, and left to govern itself because the city didn't care enough to do it properly. The police came through when they wanted arrests. The politicians came through when they wanted votes. Everyone else stayed out unless they were selling something or taking something. Into that vacuum, men like Bumpy Johnson didn't just step, they were pulled. Not by greed alone, but by necessity. Someone had to regulate. Someone had to say who could operate and who couldn't. Someone had to make sure the worst elements didn't run wild, didn't prey on the old women walking home from church, didn't turn every corner into a war zone. Bumpy was that someone. He wasn't elected, wasn't appointed. He earned it the hard way, through consistency, through judgment, through knowing when to act and when to let things settle. He'd been in Harlem since he was a boy, knew every alley, every family, every grudge that went back 2 generations. People came to him when the law wouldn't help. When a landlord was crooked, when someone's daughter got mixed up with the wrong man, when a dispute needed settling before it turned bloody. He didn't do it for love, he did it because chaos was bad for business, and business kept the neighborhood breathing. But respect, real respect, that was something else, that was earned in the eyes of grandmothers who nodded when he passed, in the way shop owners opened early when he needed a word, in the silence that fell when he entered a room, not out of fear alone, but out of recognition. Recognition that he held the line. So when that newspaper printed street rat, it wasn't just an insult to Bumpy Johnson. It was an insult to every person in Harlem who depended on the order he maintained. It was an outsider, white-owned, white-run, white-written, stepping into a world they didn't understand and spitting on the man who kept it from collapsing. The writer didn't live in Harlem, probably never walked its blocks after dark. Didn't know the difference between a hustler and a hood, between a man who took and a man who protected while he took. But Bumpy knew something the writer didn't. You could print whatever you wanted. You could call a man anything. But in Harlem, words were only as strong as the structure behind them. And Bumpy Johnson was the structure, which meant the newspaper had just declared war on the wrong foundation. The paper was called the Harlem Beacon, a name that promised light but delivered shadows. It wasn't old money or old respect. It was new, hungry, and white-owned, set up by a group of investors who saw Harlem as untapped territory. A growing black population meant growing readership, and growing readership meant advertising dollars they weren't getting yet. Their strategy was simple: sensationalize. Crime sold papers, fear sold papers. And if they could position themselves as the voice exposing Harlem's criminal element, they'd carve out a niche the bigger outlets hadn't bothered with. Bumpy Johnson's name came up in an editorial meeting like it was nothing. A reporter pitched the story: local gangster, colorful reputation, easy target. The editor, a man named Gerald Pitts, liked it, gave it the green light, told the writer to make it sharp, make it memorable. No one in that room understood what they were touching. Pitts had been in New York media for 15 years, but never in Harlem. Not really. He drove through sometimes, maybe stopped for a meal at one of the safe spots uptown when he wanted to feel cosmopolitan. But he didn't know the streets, didn't know the names that mattered, didn't know that Bumpy Johnson wasn't just some hustler you could mock for clicks and controversy. After the article ran, a few people tried to warn him. A veteran distributor, a black man who'd been running routes in Harlem for a decade, came into the office, spoke carefully, said maybe they should print a retraction, said the word on the street wasn't good. Pitts waved him off. "It's a free press. We print the truth." A local advertiser pulled their spot the same week. Didn't explain why, just said they were going in a different direction. Pitts didn't connect it. 2 newsstand owners in Harlem sent the unsold copies back, said they weren't stocking the Beacon anymore. Pitts chalked it up to poor distribution. He didn't see the pattern because he didn't believe there was one. In his world, newspapers had power. Editors had authority. The press was untouchable. But he wasn't in his world anymore. He was in Bumpy's. And in Bumpy's world, authority wasn't printed. It was lived, and the man who didn't understand it was about to learn the difference between influence and control. Bumpy Johnson never made a phone call to the newspaper, never sent a message, never had one of his men show up at the office with a threat or a warning. That wasn't how he operated. Threats were loud, and loud meant visible, and visible meant the law could step in and call it extortion or intimidation. Bumpy didn't need any of that. He just stopped holding things together. The first crack appeared in distribution. The Harlem Beacon relied on the same network every paper did: trucks, drivers, street vendors, newsstand owners. Most of those people lived in Harlem. Most of them knew Bumpy, or knew someone who knew him, or at the very least understood that crossing him meant trouble you didn't walk away from. No one had to say his name. No one had to deliver an ultimatum. The drivers just started having problems. Flat tires on delivery mornings, engine trouble that couldn't be diagnosed. One truck got stolen outright, found a week later stripped clean in the Bronx. The company filed reports. Police shrugged. These things happen. Newsstand owners suddenly decided the Beacon wasn't worth the shelf space. They'd order half as many copies, then a quarter, then none. When Pitts sent a sales guy to ask why, they'd give excuses. Slow sales, customer complaints, trying something new. All polite, all reasonable, none of it true. The street vendors, the men who stood on corners rain or shine selling papers for a nickel, stopped carrying it altogether. They didn't say why. They just didn't stock it. And when pressed, they'd look past you like they didn't hear the question. Within 2 weeks, the Beacon's Harlem circulation dropped by 60%. Pitts noticed. He held meetings, accused the distribution manager of incompetence, fired him, hired someone new. It didn't matter. The problem wasn't the manager. The problem was that the entire network had quietly, collectively decided the Beacon didn't exist anymore. Then the advertisers started pulling out. Small businesses first. A tobacco shop, a tailor, a landlord who ran ads for tenement apartments. They called in, polite but firm, said they were cutting back on marketing, didn't renew. When Pitts offered discounts, they stopped returning calls. Larger advertisers followed. A furniture company, a grocery chain, a car dealership that had been running full-page spreads. One by one, they evaporated. No loud exits, no public statements, just gone. Pitts didn't understand. The numbers didn't make sense. Ad revenue was collapsing faster than circulation, and no one would tell him why. But in Harlem, everyone knew word had gone out. Not in writing, not over the phone, just in the way information moves when a man like Bumpy wants it to. The message was simple. Anyone doing business with the Beacon was choosing a side, and it was the wrong one. No violence, no violence, no vandalism. No one got hurt. They just got isolated. And isolation, Bumpy understood, was a slower kind of death. The kind you couldn't fight because there was no enemy to punch, no law to appeal to, no accusation to defend against. Just a city that stopped listening. And a paper that realized, too late, it had been talking to itself. By the fourth week, Gerald Pitts wasn't sleeping. The Beacon had gone from a rising publication to a sinking ship, and he couldn't find the leak, couldn't plug it, couldn't even see it clearly enough to understand what was killing him. Circulation had flatlined. Advertisers were gone. The printing costs were fixed, but the revenue wasn't, and the gap between them widened every day. His investors started asking questions he couldn't answer, started using words like revaluate and restructure, which everyone knew meant the same thing: cut losses and walk away. Pitts finally understood he'd made a mistake. He just didn't know how to fix it. He tried to reach Bumpy Johnson, called around, left messages at places he'd heard Bumpy frequented, sent word through intermediaries, people who claimed they could get a meeting. Nothing came back, no response, no acknowledgement. It was like shouting into a void. One night, desperate, Pitts went to Harlem himself, walked into a club on 145th Street, the kind of place he would have never entered a month ago. The music stopped when he came through the door, not all at once, just slowly, like air leaking from a tire. People turned, looked at him, didn't say a word. He asked for Bumpy Johnson. The bartender wiped down a glass, didn't look up. Don't know him. Pitts tried again. I need to speak with him. It's important. Don't know him, the bartender repeated. Pitts stood there another moment, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. Then he left. Walked back to his car with his head down, hands shaking, knowing he'd just been erased. He tried one more thing, a public apology. He wrote it himself. A front-page editorial in the Beacon, what little of it still printed. He called the original article a mistake, said it was poorly researched, unfairly written, didn't reflect the values of the publication. He stopped short of naming Bumpy directly, but the message was clear enough. It didn't matter. No one read it. Or if they did, they didn't care. Because Bumpy Johnson had already made his point, and it wasn't the kind that required a response. It wasn't about being right or wrong. It wasn't about an apology or a retraction. It was about understanding power. The Beacon printed its last issue 3 days later, a skeleton crew, half the pages filled with filler content, no ads, no distribution. Pitts told the staff it was a temporary suspension. Everyone knew it wasn't. The building locked a week after that. Equipment stayed inside, desks covered in dust. The sign out front eventually came down, replaced by a "for lease" notice that stayed up for months. Bumpy Johnson never went near the place, never said a word about it publicly, didn't need to. Harlem understood. The rest of New York understood. And every editor, every reporter, every publisher who thought about writing Bumpy Johnson's name learned the same lesson Gerald Pitts had paid for. You don't print a man's death until you're sure you can survive his silence. The empty building on 127th Street became a landmark of a different kind. People passed it, glanced at the dark windows, and remembered. Not with fear exactly, more like respect for a lesson taught without a single blow landed, a single threat spoken. Other newspapers took notice. The big ones, the ones that had been in New York for generations, they didn't need to be told twice. Bumpy Johnson's name appeared less frequently in print after that, and when it did, the tone was different. Careful. Clinical. No more street rat. No more editorials about cleaning up Harlem's criminal element. Just facts, stripped bare, reported like weather. In Harlem, the story spread the way important stories do. Barbershop to stoop, diner to church basement. It became the kind of tale people told to explain how things worked, who held what, and why you didn't test certain lines. Bumpy never spoke about it. Didn't need to claim credit. Didn't need to be seen as the villain or the hero. He just went back to what he'd always done, moving through the neighborhood, handling business, maintaining the order that kept Harlem breathing. But everyone knew. The young men on the corners knew. The shopkeepers knew. The grandmothers sitting on their stoops in the evening, fanning themselves with folded newspapers, they knew too. Respect wasn't given. It was built. Brick by brick, decision by decision, consequence by consequence. And Bumpy Johnson had just laid another brick. Years later, when people talked about him, they mentioned the usual things. The numbers, the territory, the battles. But the ones who really understood, the ones who'd been there. They bring up the newspaper, the one that called him a street rat, the one that learned what happens when you confuse ink with power, the one that went silent in 30 days.